New York Congressman Eliot Engel is the ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He is also the co-chair of the European Union Caucus, and he joins me right now. And I'm appreciative of you being here in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in. First of all, your thoughts on this horrible tragedy?
Well, it's horrible, and obviously we have to wait and see who did it. But all signs right now point to pro-Russian separatists. They have been firing missiles at cargo planes all week long, and it seems very likely to me that this may have been a miscalculation or a mistake where they thought that this plane was a cargo plane. That's certainly how it seems to me, but of course we don't know for sure.
Are you concerned at all about transparency as this investigation is conducted?
Of course, because a lot of people have a lot of reason to try to hide what really happened. I think Russia doesn't want the world to know. Certainly the pro-Russian separatists don't want the world to know, and so we worry about contamination, about the black boxes being removed, of people tampering with things, but it's still very premature to say. But the conclusion that I think people are likely to come to is that it was either the pro-Russian separatists or perhaps Russia itself that did it, not realizing perhaps that it was a passenger airplane.
Yeah, and on the heels of that, I want to say that Russian President Vladimir Putin has certainly expressed his condolences to the victims and their families. That said, here's a quote, and I read it. I want to note that this tragedy would not have happened if there were peace on this land, if the military actions had not been renewed in southeast Ukraine, and certainly the state over whose territory this occurs bears the responsibility for this awful tragedy. So how do you interpret what he is saying or implying here?
Well, it's difficult to interpret because everybody's going to try to spin it to what they want it to be. Look, I think Putin has been playing a very bad role in this whole situation. He is certainly encouraging these separatists. He is certainly playing games. He is certainly allowing them to get Russian military equipment. And whether this was ultimately an accident or not, or a case of a mistaken identity of a plane, I think that Putin and Russia bear responsibility. This is an act of terror. I mean, this is to bring down a passenger plane with innocent civilians on it. I mean, that's horrific. The world cannot just tolerate this as something that happens in war. This should never happen. And therefore, I think the United States needs to work very closely with our allies to tell Putin or to sanction Putin so that it won't happen again.
And would you like that to come in the form of our European allies coming on board with regard to sanctions against Russia? As we noted, President Obama was talking to President Putin at the time of the crash and announced to him of these new sanctions. Europe has seemed to be a little bit reluctant to come on board.
Well, Europe's reluctant because it gets much of its energy needs from Russia. And that's a real problem. But I happen to think sanctions are the way to go. You know, we are now negotiating with Iran, and it was sanctions that brought Iran to the negotiating table because their economy is hurting. I think it's sanctions that will hurt Putin. Putin has to really understand that the NATO alliance will not stand for this. He's trying to recreate the Soviet Union again. Frankly, we're not interested. We want to make sure that he's not rewarded for his aggression. So I think this is something that has to be very tough. I think the United States cannot go it alone. We need our European allies to do it. And frankly, Alex, I think that the whole NATO alliance right now is in a state of flux. I think this is a defining moment for NATO. I think that the formula for NATO over the past several years has been that Russia's a partner. That's clearly no longer the case. Russia, unfortunately, is an adversary, and I think the whole formulation of what NATO is and what we need to do with NATO needs to be changed. Or otherwise, I think NATO is dead, and that really means that countries in NATO need to contribute, according to the charter, 2% of their economy, of their budget, towards defense. Right now, only 3 or 4 countries do that. That needs to change.
Representative Eliot Engel, thank you very much for weighing in. I appreciate that, sir.
Thank you.